Sure. Hi, Joe Raffaele. I am a longevity medicine physician who has been practicing this for over 25 years now. Started out as anti-aging medicine when I left internal medicine back in the late 90s after practicing for a while in primary care. Saw the light, saw that really it's time to address the aging process rather than just wait for diseases to occur. So I opened up a practice with an ex-partner of mine down in Manhattan, where I've been ever since then. Um, in the early 2000s, I started focusing on biomarkers of aging because if you're going to be a longevity physician and you say you're slowing down the aging process, you have to be able to show your patients that that's actually what you're doing. It's important to make them feel good, to make them function better, to make them able to, not have diseases. But
Mhm.
really, my focus is looking at how to slow down the aging process and measure that and make incremental changes in our therapies to make sure that in an evidence bay, in an evidence way, in an N of one, we like to call it, personalized program for the patient, because each of us is different. I mean, you can hear about this peptide or that geroprotector or that hormone or that diet. It may work in 30% of the people, it may work in 50% of the people. It's not going to work in everybody, and it really depends on your medical history, your genetics, your epigenetics, um, and your disease exposure over your lifetime to know what therapies you should be applying to yourself and for me to be applying to my patients.
Mhm. So let's start with some basics. Now, in your longevity medicine practice, what are the most predictive biomarkers you normally for aging check, test for patients?
Yeah, so I get that question a lot. It is, I would start by saying that while there was thought to be sort of one best biomarker of aging, there really isn't. Aging is such a complex process that it really takes place at many different levels, at different rates in different organ systems. There are overall processes like inflammation, telomere length shortening that are more generalized to every cell. But in terms of individual biomarkers, I would say the more biomarkers you're doing, the more robust picture you have of people's aging processes. Now, of course, you have to triage to just to a certain extent. You can't do all the tests on everybody. So
Mhm.
I look at basic functional tests of where you are from a body composition standpoint. Um, it's not about how much you weigh; it's about what the weight is made out of. So I think body composition is a very, very important one to see
Mhm.
what your relative percentage of fat is versus your lean body mass versus your muscle, and then whether that fat is in the visceral compartment in the belly where it causes problems, as opposed to in the buttocks or in the arms or the legs, subcutaneous fat. So body composition, you want to eat a lower fat diet. You want to make sure you don't eat too much sugar. But the most important thing is not to carry too much fat, because that changes how all those calories that go into you get metabolized and how they affect your inflammation in your body. So staying lean is a very, very important marker. Then you want to, of course, take care of your circulatory system. And that means, we think about the heart, but it's really the arteries that are the, the, the heart of the matter, should I say.
Mhm.
It's the arteries that carry the blood, the oxygen, the nutrients to all the tissues. And, in humans, as opposed to some model animals that we study like worms and flies, the circulatory system is the one that's probably the most vulnerable in us as we age. Our lungs, unless we smoke or get exposed to
Mhm.
toxic inhalants, really don't cause many people to die, unless they get an infection. But the circulatory system starts to age pretty early on. Your arteries get stiffer. Um, your ability to dilate your arteries, what we call endothelial function, decreases. And all of that decreases your ability to deliver oxygen and nutrients to your vital tissues. And we can actually track that from a very young age, from your early 20s, the stiffness of your arteries way before you have any high blood pressure or any plaque in your arteries, what we call atherosclerosis. That stiffening increases mostly in that peripheral dilation stuff, so that you can measure it with a device that measures what's called central arterial pressure. And that's the pressure that your heart has to work against. And that's a little different from the pressure that's in the cuff in your arm when you take a regular blood pressure. So I follow that with a device called the Connect Pulse, which is a smaller version of what used to be a pretty expensive device. called the sphygmocore. And so I can tell you what your cardio age is. And I use cardio age instead of arterial age because it's catchier, and also because, as I said, it's the arteries that affect the heart. So my goal, rather than just to prevent a heart attack or heart failure, is to allow the arteries to age as slowly as possible, because it's the reason why the world records in sprinting and in most athletic endeavors are not past 30, 35. It's because while the arteries aren't damaged, they're not functioning at their peak level. So my goal is to keep them functioning at their peak level for as long as possible. And I have a metric now that I can look at. And if diet, lifestyle, exercise is not doing it, or hormone replacement therapy in men and women, then I might have to go to pharmaceuticals. But whatever it takes to keep the arteries functioning in a very elastic and a very functional way, that's what I'll do. I'll focus on that. So those are two major areas: the arterial system and your body composition that I look at. There are a myriad other ones. There's all the fancy ones that we talk about, epigenetics. You can look at senescent cell load. That starts getting a little bit more esoteric, which I'm happy to talk about. But at a basic level, if you keep your body fat down, your muscle mass up, your arteries nice and supple and elastic, that goes a long way toward maintaining high function and reducing the risk of cardiovascular disease and less cardiopulmonary function. So those are two major ones.
Mm-hmm. Which is very important. I agree 100% with you. So inflammation, you mentioned about inflammation, or we call inflammaging. What are your go-to anti-inflammatory interventions? We know that is a very important process in aging too. So how to reduce the risks of inflammation, how to measure it, first of all, what again biomarkers you normally routinely use, and how to prevent or reverse this inflammation.
Yeah, so inflammation is a great catch-all term, and that term inflammaging, which is the inflammation that takes place, what we call sterile inflammation, because it's not from an actual infection, but it's increase in activities of white blood cells and inflammatory processes that take place as we get older, is something that really robs you of quality years of your life. And that's why we kind of focus on the immune system. There's a number of different things that contribute to inflammation. Getting back to body composition, number one thing, if you have a lot of visceral fat, your inflammation is typically going to go up. What marker do we use? The most available one is the high sensitivity C-reactive protein. You'll see that the normal range is below 3, sort of 1 to 3 is normal, less than 1 is optimal. The lower the better for the C-reactive protein. So we have a software system that looks at all your labs and grades them from A through F. And normal is going to get a B, but optimal is going to get an A. So patients want to, even if they're at, say, 1.5 or 2, 1.5 or 2 for the C-reactive protein, if they start exercising, if they perhaps start eating more fish and having more omega-3 fatty acids, so they have less of the inflammatory prostaglandins as opposed to the inflammatory ones that get made out of the fatty acids, they can lower that number further. We look at that number when you get overweight, that number goes up. As you lose weight, that number comes down. You can take things like curcumin, which is found in turmeric. There's like I said, regular exercise and keeping your weight down. And then what's critically important is your overall senescent cell burden, and that is a number of different ways to measure that. I mean, we don't have a traditional sort of regular Quest lab number for that. We see the effects of it in the C-reactive protein, but one of the things that causes an increase in C-reactive protein is what we call inflammatory cytokines, like IL-6, interleukin 6, TNF alpha, tumor necrosis factor alpha. Those inflammatory markers are increased by senescent cells. So what are senescent cells? People have heard about them, the zombie cells, and they're called zombie cells. I think reasonably a pretty good analogy, because they're not dead, but they're not doing their job. They don't really function normally anymore, but they don't just sit there quietly. They don't do what other cells do during a normal process, where if they get damaged, then they die, it's called apoptosis, the process where they die and they get cleaned up by the immune system. They are resistant to that because of molecular changes that have taken place. And so they sit there and they secrete these inflammatory markers. And it can be just a small percentage of the number of cells in a tissue, like in muscle or in liver or in brain or in your pancreas, that can cause a lot of damage, and it can also cause more senescent cells around them. So reducing the senescent cell number is important. There are ways to do that. One way is to really increase your exercise. Exercise can reduce senescent cells because it mobilizes them into the circulation that they can be cleared out by the immune system. There's a lot of other factors that go into senescent cell reduction. You hear about senolytic therapies that people are taking, but I would encourage people to work with a longevity doctor that has experience in looking at measuring senescent cell load through some of these more esoteric labs we can talk about before they embark on something like rapamycin to reduce senescent cell load, or some of the senolytics like quercetin or fisetin, because what I'm finding in my practice, where we look at a lot of biomarkers, and particularly two tests where we look at the senescent cell load, is that fully 30% of the people I'm looking at don't have really high senescent cell loads. I mean, they're older, but because they haven't been exposed to a lot of toxins or a lot of viruses, particularly a virus called cytomegalovirus, which is a herpes virus that's pretty common, or they haven't had a lot of diseases in the past, they don't have a lot of senescent cells. And you don't need to get rid of senescent cells in those patients. In fact, you might be doing them a disservice because senescence is a very important tumor suppressor mechanism. It's one of the most important ones. It's what happens when a cell gets damaged, it can become senescent, but that means a senescent cell by definition is a cell that no longer divides. And you want that to happen to a cell whose DNA has been damaged, because then they can't continue to divide and turn into a tumor. That's how senescence functions as a tumor suppressor mechanism. But you don't want to accumulate a whole lot of them. So it's a fine balance, and being able to measure those cells is something that an experienced longevity physician can help you do so you can see what is actually happening in you. I have some patients, 60 years old, senescent cell load is 10%. Another patient, 60 years old, senescent cell load is 70%. And it just depends. And you don't know. It's like treating somebody with high blood pressure. You go, high blood pressure increases with age. Okay, that is true. So everybody that's older should be on a high blood pressure medication. No, because not everybody that's older has high blood pressure or has stiff arteries. How do we know that? Because we have a way to measure it. Now, we haven't had a way to measure senescent cells, and we're getting better and better at it now. One test is a test from a company called Sapir Bio that looks at senescent cells. Another test is one that is not as readily available because it's from the UCLA clinical immunology laboratory, where we look at cells that are lacking a particular marker called CD28. That can only be gotten through a research. You can get it through my company and also through another company, but you'd have to work with a longevity physician to get that test. But again, it's great to do your own biohacking, but you want to be able to make sure you're getting the right tests done. And it takes a lot of experience working with these things before you really know whether or not, A, you're a candidate for it, for something like rapamycin or any of the other molecules I mentioned, and B, being able to measure whether it's working or not. So how do you know? I mean, you don't typically feel that much different, but it's like lowering cholesterol. If you lower your senescent cell load, you are presumably really lowering your risk for a lot of the chronic diseases, because depending on what tissue compartment they're in, they can cause the dysfunction of that organ system, be it the bones, the liver, the arteries, the brain, etc. But you don't know that until something bad happens, and that's usually further down the road. And if something good happening, you don't necessarily know it either. It's like if your cholesterol, your LDL goes from 200 to 100, you don't feel any different, but your risk of having a heart attack or stroke is significantly reduced. So I would encourage people to measure before treating with these kinds of supplements and medications.
Yeah, test and not guess. So how
Right.
reliable these tests are, for example, in measuring senescent cells?
Yeah, so I've been using the UCLA tests for 15 years in my practice, and they are quite reliable. I wish they were more available to the public. They're reproducible. We see them, unless something's changing, we see them staying pretty stable. The Sapir Biotest is based on very, very good science. One of the co-founders of it was the former president of the National Cancer Institute, Ned Sharpless. So based on very good science, looks at a molecule called P16 and the mRNA expression of that molecule as a measure of senescent cells. We find that they're stable unless something is changing. It's not part of common practice yet. And again, if you take low dose quercetin or low dose fisetin, um, you're probably not going to do any major damage, but higher doses, you can start to take away too many cells, and you don't want to do that. So being able to measure it, I think, is good. And I find them to be reliable, and anybody can, DM me on Instagram if they want to know about these tests and how they can get them for their practices. I'd be happy to help them with that.
That's great. That's very good to know. So we keep hearing about epigenetics. You talk a lot about telomere biology and also about methylation. So just for audience, if you can explain in a easy way, what are those in aging and longevity world?
Sure. So epigenetics is the changes that can occur to your genetic code. Epi in Greek means on top of. So it's the changes that go on top of the genetic code to turn on genes and turn off genes. So, every cell in your body has the exact same genetic code. It has the exact same DNA in it. So why isn't every cell the same? Because some genes are turned on to make proteins that make that cell different from other cells. A nose cell, a toe cell, a toe cell. And it really depends on which genes are being turned on. That's what's called gene expression. When a gene is turned on, you make a certain protein that changes the cell. When it's turned off, that protein isn't made. So epigenetics is the science of looking at the marks that change on the genome to turn those on or off. And there are a number of different ones, but the main one that we look at is what's called methylation. Methylation, adding a methyl group, which is a carbon with 3 hydrogens attached to it, is a process that takes place all the time in the body for signaling of many different types within the body. But when a certain part of the DNA has a methyl group attached to it, it's called a CPG. That is often located in an area where there's a signal to turn on a gene or turn off a gene, which is a promoter, or it can be something called a repressor to turn off the gene. Typically, when it's methylated, it's turned off, and when it's not methylated, it's turned on. And that can change. And the wonderful thing about epigenetics is that, we used to think, I'm old enough to know and was practicing medicine when they decoded the human genome back in 2000. And we thought that, medicine was going to change incredibly from that understanding. But really, and there's still the genome and your individual genetics are very important, but the real interesting thing is in the epigenetics, which genes get turned off and which genes get turned on, because that can be affected by lifestyle, by diet, by exercise, by infectious disease exposure, by many, many different things, so that you have in some ways control over your genome. Your genetics is the orchestra, the epigenetics is the conductor who's telling the violins play a little bit more, the percussion calm down a little bit. It's really conducting things, and what you do from a lifestyle standpoint has been shown in many studies to affect epigenetics or your gene expression. Now, when it comes to aging, there are these epigenetic clocks that have been developed by Steve Horvath initially back in 2013, the first papers came out, and they could predict based on the methylation pattern how old a person was based on the methylation pattern of their white blood cells, the DNA of the white blood cells. And these clocks were so incredible that they could predict age within plus or minus 2 or 3 years, chronological age, that is. And we were like, wow, these are the best biomarkers on the planet, and we should be checking them in everybody. And when they became commercially available, 7 or 8 years later, or yeah, something like that. I've been doing about 5 years in my practice with a company called True Diagnostics. They were very, very interesting, but it turns out that predicting chronological age in medicine and in longevity medicine isn't as useful because, if I want to know how old you are, I can just ask you, right? From a chronological age standpoint. What I want to know is, how healthy are you for a 60-year-old
Mhm.
versus somebody else who's 60-year-old? So what happened is we started training, the company started training, and the scientists started training the methylation data on more important markers than chronological age, like how healthy you are, whether your arteries are functioning well, whether your C-reactive protein was low, what your blood pressure was. And so now we have these second generation clocks that give you more information. And so you can tell. There's some studies done looking at a good friend and colleague, Kara Fitzgerald, looking at a supplement and diet program that reversed epigenetic aging by about 3 years. And that was published to a lot of fanfare because it showed that through the things that we know are good for you, like eating a diet that's got lots of phytonutrients in it, and then taking some supplements that can turn on good genes that help with reducing inflammation, can turn these epigenetic clocks back. And so that's one way that you can track whether what you're doing is beneficial. And that's kind of epigenetics in a nutshell. It's just looking at those methylation patterns, trying to, because what happens, as Horvath showed very eloquently in his early studies, is that not only the different cells turn on different genes to be different kinds of cells, but the same cells as they get older start to have different methylation patterns that are so characteristic that they can predict your chronological age. But those methylation changes are leading to less well-functioning cells that have more of an aging phenotype, and so now we have a way to sort of directly access the aging process. We're still working out that. There's more clocks coming out. I mean, anybody that follows this field knows that there's almost a new clock being published every quarter, or even more frequently than that. So it's a tool that we're working with in addition. But I would say, if a clock or any of these molecular tests, even the senescent cells, tells you that you're doing better, or the therapy is improving that marker, but your arterial stiffness is getting worse, that's a gold standard. The arterial stiffness, that's something that we know is predicts mortality, cardiovascular disease, many different things. So you want a therapy that maybe moves those markers in the right direction, but also has effects on pulmonary function, arterial function, muscle function, and then particularly immune system function. So you have to look at it from many different angles. That's why there's this whole concept in the longevity field called the hallmarks of aging, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And it was again in 2013 that this paper was published that showed that there are these 9 hallmarks that are the sort of major processes in aging. And what I'm really always amazed by and fascinated by is that the more we learn, the more we see how each of the hallmarks affects the other hallmarks. So I just gave a talk, and I don't know if you were at, I think we maybe met at that conference, or not, I don't remember right now, but on how telomere length and telomerase can affect epigenetics. And it affects epigenetics through affecting methylation patterns. So telomere attrition, the shortening of telomeres, is the number 2 hallmark of aging. Genomic instability, or DNA damage, is the number 1, and the third one is epigenetic alterations. So seeing studies where the pathways that are connecting all of these shows that the hallmarks of aging are right, but also that aging is very complex. And if you're going to tinker in one area, you really got to look at the other areas to make sure that you're not doing something downstream that's problematic. So I remember when I first started practicing, we were doing a lot of hormone optimization, and we got really busy when the Women's Health Initiative came out, and then got very good at doing hormone therapy over the next 5 years. And I'm like, what's left? I mean, we got aging figured out. We figured your hormones out. Everything's good. And then all of a sudden, there's this explosion of all this gerontology literature about all the aspects of aging that are so complicated and interrelated that now, 20 years later, I'm like, oh, there's so much I don't know. And there's so much to know. So that's great because I still love medicine. I still love practicing it and still learning it, but it means that it's very, very complex. And you have to look at all the moving parts. You have to look at the organ system, the whole body, VO2 max. You have to look at the lungs. Then you have to look at the cells. then you have to look at the DNA, the epigenetics, the molecular level. Every level gives you different kinds of information, different things, different levers to turn to help improve aging. And it's it's the field. Longevity medicine and AI are the fastest growing fields because who doesn't want to live a long, healthy life,
Exactly.
and who doesn't want somebody doing everything for you, which is what AI is going to be.
That's
Just
true.
kidding.
Exactly. Yes. It's amazing. But as you mentioned, it's very holistic and very personalized. Each person is different. So what about hormones? At A Forum, you talked, I love that talk about glycogen age and glycan age and hormones. So what's the role of hormones in aging? We now moved from symptom relief with hormones. We think about anti-aging with hormones now.
Yeah, I mean, we should move from symptom relief to aging. I think still some of the societies are talking about only treating women for symptoms, and now they're at least saying you can continue to treat them for the rest of their life if they have symptoms when they stop therapy. But this again is one of the things that's also been really fascinating over the past 20 years is that when before the Women's Health Initiative in 2002, hormone therapy was thought of as anti-aging medicine. Really, a woman went through menopause, she lost her estrogen or progesterone, you put it back on, and it was going to help her live a longer, healthier life because of lots of observational trials like the Nurses Health Study that looked at women who were on hormones versus women not on hormones who had fewer cardiovascular events, less Alzheimer's disease, all observational studies. But then they did the big study. They did it wrong. They interpreted it wrong. That's a whole nother IG Live we can talk about at some point. But so then everybody was taken off of hormones, and it was like it doesn't help you with longevity, and they were wrong, and they're meant for many reasons. They misinterpreted. The younger women had all the benefits that we knew. The older women didn't have them, and they put them together, and so they needed to do subgroup analyses and all that sort of stuff. But what I'm getting to is that it was longevity medicine back then. Then nobody should be on it. It went from 40% of women down to 4% of women were on it. A whole generation of women lost out because of the misinterpretation of this study. But now, with these new molecular markers that we have, we're learning that hormone therapy actually is longevity medicine by looking at how it affects things. And one of the things that I talked about in my talk at A4M was how looking at IgG glycosylation, which is that mouthful for the pattern of non-glucose sugars that are attached to your DNA, I'm sorry, to your IgG antibodies, is something that changes with age, changes so you can get something called a glycan age, because that pattern, just like the epigenetic pattern, there's a lot of analogous stuff there, but this is non-glucose sugar molecules that are attached to your IgG, which then changes their function. It's just not just a biomarker like gray hair might indicate that you're getting older. It is actually changing it from interacting with other immune cells more strongly or less strongly, depending on the pattern that's attached to it. So when you're young, the pattern of sugars attached to it is less inflammatory. As you get older, for various reasons which I won't get into, it starts to become more inflammatory, and that's why you can give a sort of a glycan age because it gets older. Now, it's not as precise a predictor of chronological age as, say, the epigenetic clocks, the original ones were, but it's giving you kind of actionable biological information. And that's seen very graphically in a woman as she goes from perimenopause through the menopausal transition. A young, healthy woman, I see this in my practice all the time, I've been looking at glycan ages for 4 years now, will come in and she's in good shape. So other things that affect that are like your body fat, your metabolic health, your blood sugar, whether you have high blood pressure, how much inflammation you have in your body. If you're really in good shape, you're usually 5-10 years younger than your chronological age. This woman, as she went through menopause and lost estrogen, her glycan age shot up 10 years over the course of 1.5 years, going from estrogen replete to almost no estrogen, which is what the postmenopausal state is. And then we put her on hormone therapy, and her glycan age drops back down again because estrogen has a profound effect on the enzymes that determine what pattern of sugars are attached to your antibodies in your blood. And that younger pattern is a less inflammatory pattern. And so doing hormone therapy is anti-aging in the sense that it's taking at least your immune system, one aspect of your immune system, and a very important aspect. Those are one of the major proteins that are floating around your blood, your IgG antibodies. They're one of the major arms of your immune system. Um, they're profoundly affecting how they function. And the same thing happens in men. So I'm always also fascinated by the fact that estrogen is thought of as a woman's hormone and testosterone as a man's hormone. And actually, they're both very important in both sexes, but just in sort of in different levels. But estrogen actually in men, same thing happens. If their testosterone levels go down, their estrogen goes down because they make estrogen out of their testosterone. Their glycan age will go up. And I showed some case studies of patients that have dropped 20, 25 years in glycan age when they're put on optimal testosterone replacement therapy in men. So in both men and women, from a symptom standpoint, but also from a molecular standpoint, looking at inflammation through the lens of how inflammatory your antibodies are, by being able to turn back that pattern to a more youthful pattern, hormone therapy is longevity medicine. That's what we call it now, not anti-aging medicine. So that has been a really interesting journey for me. I mean, when I first started sending samples to the company, I got a call from the chief scientific officer, the co-founder, Gordon Louse, and he's like, "What are you doing there? You're sending all these samples, and these are patients that have been on therapy for a long time, and then the test had just become available." And he's like, "You have 60-year-old guys coming back with glycan age of 25, and women, in their late menopausal years at 35. What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm doing hormone replacement therapy. That's what I'm doing." And so we, subsequently published a paper on men and the effect of testosterone on glycan age. So that is a cornerstone of my practice, hormone optimization, because estradiol turns out to be an extremely important molecule in maintaining health. It's important for mitochondrial function. It's important for arterial function, for brain function. It's really shouldn't be thought of as a reproductive hormone. It is a whole body hormone that you need. And in fact, Jennifer Garrison has talked about the ovaries. Jennifer Garrison is you heard her talk.
Yes, yes,
A
yes.
brilliant talk. She's leading the way on the sort of the research into that very underfunded area of women's ovarian aging, and she has said, "Don't talk about the ovaries as reproductive organs. They are whole body organs, and they produce the hormones that keep the body healthy. So yes, they are important in reproduction, of course, but they're much more than that. And I think that's something that we've learned, and that's what puts together the hormone optimization into the whole longevity medicine thing and fits it into the hallmarks of aging as well."
Mhm. Yes, that's amazing. It's great time to practice medicine. I always say to everyone, I just love it. So exciting with hormones and longevity medicine. So you mentioned about body composition, how important it is, and muscle is another longevity biomarker. So first of all, how do you normally in your practice measure muscle mass and how to support and protect our muscles?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's another realization that we've had, is that muscle is not just for contracting and lifting things and moving the body around. It's actually an endocrine organ. It secretes a lot of hormones called exerkines that get released when you exercise, particularly BDNF, which is good for your brain to make new neurons in your brain. So it's an incredibly important organ to keep healthy. The bodybuilders we used to think were knuckleheads when that was politically incorrect, but they're probably doing great things for their brain by keeping their muscles really healthy. So there's a number of different tools we have for measuring body composition. The DEXA scan can be used to look at it in a very gold standard kind of way, which I think is fine. There's a little bit of radiation involved in it. It's the same instrument that does bone density. But I think a more convenient and easier way is to use what's called bioimpedance plethysmography, where the instrument sends a little current through you and then models your body and can tell you how much fat how much muscle, how much visceral fat you have. There's a number of companies that make very good instruments. I've been measuring them in my practice for many, many years because it's not about the weight. I have patients that come in, they start exercising, they watch their diet, they're on hormone optimization, they're lifting weights. They're like, I haven't lost any weight. I'm like, are your pants are a little thinner? Do you see some more muscle? And sure enough, their body fat percentage went from 25 down to 18 with very little change in weight because they're trading off fat for muscle. So it's not about the weight, it's about the composition. And we're lucky now to have these same instruments that are $10,000 in the office available that are almost as precise for home use for a couple $100. So I encourage patients to get those if they're telemedicine patients so they can track their body composition because if you're on a weight loss drug, you want to make sure that you're trying to hold on as much muscle as you can, and the scale isn't telling you the whole story. You really want to know what the actual lean body mass is, and then a subset of that is the muscle, and then the fat, and a subset of that is the fat that's in the belly, underneath the skin, underneath the abdominal muscle wall, which is called the visceral fat, and that's the fat that causes damage. And you can track that now. And it's really about keeping that at an ideal level. Because when that level is low, unless you have really bad type 2 diabetes genetics, you have very good insulin sensitivity, very good blood sugar, very good hemoglobin A1C, which is that measure of your blood sugar over the past 3 to 4 months. And that gives you all sorts of dividends in terms of lower inflammation, brain function, arterial health, et cetera. So that's the number one thing we look at, body composition, arterial health. So there's other ways to do it. I mean, there's some other types. There's hydrostatic weighing, which we don't really do much of anymore. There's the bod pod. There's those things that now take pictures. I don't know how great they are at predicting body fat and visceral fat, but they're kind of interesting in looking at where the fat is. If you're looking to see the 3D scanners that look at you and spin you on it, that can tell you where the fat is. That's for body sculpting. But I pretty much stick with InBody and the Sika, which are the two sort of main. Coke and Pepsi like to think of them of the in-office or now in-home. The other ones at home you can get are the Tanita, and there's a bunch of other companies that do the Hume, all those other ones. If you're going to get something for somebody as a gift, get them one of those things so they can track their body composition. That's a great thing to have, along with a blood pressure cuff. Preferentially one of those that can look at central arterial pressure that now you can get for about $300. And when you have those two metrics at home, you can really tell how well you're doing from a large percentage of what we look at.
Mm-hmm. Great. And how to support muscles. So we
Oh,
measure,
sorry.
and apart from weightlifting, what are the other recommendations you normally give to your patients?
Well, I like to say that now exercise is not negotiable. It's non-negotiable. You got to exercise, and not only do you have to do cardio, you have to do resistance training. So, and by resistance training, I don't mean that you have to go to the gym and lift weights. Once you get to a certain point, that's probably something you're going to want to do. But just lunges, squats, push-ups. If you have a pull-up bar, but you should be working on all the major muscle groups to maintain them, and if you're lower in muscle mass, to increase the muscle mass. That's just non-negotiable, and you have to have a good diet, good protein intake for that. You hear all sorts of numbers thrown out there for how many grams of protein per pound body weight that you should be taking. I've heard numbers as much as 1 gram, 1.5 grams. I find that in my practice, since I have the luxury of being able to measure the muscle and I can do hormone optimization, that most people don't need as high level as that. And if you are making muscle, increasing muscle, then you're taking in enough protein. That's all there is to it. And if you're not, then you're not exercising enough, and you may be taking in too much protein, but it's just getting turned into fat or excess calories. So I like to sort of just a piece of protein the size of the palm of your hand 3 times a day, and that's going to get you probably a half to 3/4 of a gram of protein per pound of body weight. It could be more than that, but there is evidence that really high levels of protein as you're older can potentially cause some kidney damage. That's if you're utilizing it, then it shouldn't. But it's really part of a whole program of resistance training, along with maintaining cardiovascular fitness, and then hormone optimization, and then looking at whether or not you're increasing muscle mass. And the place where people don't like to work as much on it, but where the biggest dividends are, is in the legs. And that's the hardest. I mean, everyone likes to go in there and do their bicep curls and the chest and stuff. Me too. I like that too. But because squats hurt, and lunges, they hurt. These big muscles burn, but those are the biggest muscles, and the glutes are the ones that. So you want to maintain those. That's so that you can do all the other activities you want to do. Like if you're playing tennis, I have patients that are avid tennis players, and the French Open is going on right now, and everybody's excited. But if you play tennis and you're over the age of even 40, never mind 50 or 60, and you're not lifting weights, then you're going to get an injury, or you're going to get osteoarthritis. Because you got to keep the muscles that stabilize the joints, the hip, the knee, the ankles strong. And then, of course, you need to keep those muscles flexible, and you need to do mobility training. So it's a lot of work to stay healthy. They talk about 60 being the new 40. Yeah, but you got to work at it. And that's why I say it's non-negotiable. I'm going to help you. I'm going to optimize your hormones. I'm going to put you on the supplements you need to be on. I'm going to keep you accountable and track things for you. But if you don't do the work, then you're not going to get the benefits. You'll get some benefits, but you're not going to get as many as you could. So that's what I'm always beating on patients about that sort of thing. Most of my patients, I'm very lucky, are very motivated. They do what I recommend that they do, and they see results, and they're very happy about it. And that's a very virtuous cycle. But sometimes you just sort of have to keep on going at it, and just start with the minimum. I mean, just air squats, air squats, push-ups. Advance from on the knees to the full push-up. Just little steps like that. You hear it all the time, so it's almost a cliche, but consistency is the most important thing. Little steps get you to your goal much more than going like gangbusters. Everybody's in the gym in January, and then all of a sudden, they get hurt because they're going too hard, and then they're back to their old habits by February, March. You need to be consistent straight through.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. What's your approach on cognitive aging, especially for people who are high functioning and worried a little bit about that cognitive decline, or feel that there are some memory gaps?
Yeah, so a couple of things. I mean, first of all, there is something called age-associated memory impairment, which is something that's quote unquote normal. That means that it's not leading toward an increased risk of Alzheimer's disease or significant cognitive decline. That word is on the tip of my tongue, or not as good with faces and names. But I'm not satisfied with that. Just as I'm not satisfied with just preventing cardiovascular disease, I want to be able to function as high a level as possible. So getting back to exercise, I mean, we know now that probably the number one, certainly the lowest hanging fruit on that, is exercise. And it's not just cardio. Cardio is very important, but the BDNF that comes from this resistance training is very important, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And being active, not being overweight. Good insulin signaling is very important for the brain. Altered insulin glucose metabolism in the brain is something that occurs when you have insulin resistance because you're overweight. So again, getting back to those things, keeping the health of one organ system helps other organ systems. That's what they're all interconnected. Not having bad habits. Too much alcohol, that's very bad for your brain. Certainly engagement. I have a lot of very high functioning patients, so engagement in things, learning a new language, picking up a new instrument, community, social interaction, all that stuff is very, very important. And then you get into more esoteric things like hormone therapy is absolutely important for the brain. Anti-inflammation, things that reduce inflammation in your body. But all the things that are good for the arterial system are really good for the brain, because when the arterial system's not working well, the brain's not working well. And then you also have to look at your genetic predisposition. So, looking at the apolipoprotein E, what your genotype is. Are you the average, which is a 3, average risk of Alzheimer's disease, average risk of cognitive decline? The prodrome to Alzheimer's disease is something called mild cognitive impairment, where you're starting to be below average on a number of different areas of cognition. on sort of standardized testing. We use CNS vital signs. This is an online test you can do, 25 minutes to figure out where you are in comparison to people your age. When you can start to prevent that, that's important. The more esoteric tests you can start looking at. I'm sorry, we're on the apolipoprotein E3. So if you have a 4, which is 25% of the population, or if you have 2 4s, then your risk with 1 4 is 2 to 3-fold, so 200 to 300% higher. If you have 2 4s, it's up to 10-fold higher, or even higher than that. So you're at quite significantly increased risk with that genotype, and that's not uncommon. Like I said, 25% of the population, 1 or 2% have 2 of them. If you have that, you really need to be aggressive about all your risk factors. You need to be very low on the alcohol, really low on the stress, keeping your body composition, keeping your exercise, and then you can track it. I mean, there's now MRI available through a company called NeuroAge Therapeutics that can look at your brain and look at brain volumes and see how that's tracking over time. And the change in brain volume, you can get something called a brain age. And if you have a brain age that's 5 years younger than your chronological age, you've almost completely mitigated that effect of the ApoE4 if you can keep your brain age younger. And all those things that I talked about, exercise, hormones, keeping lean, stress reduction, engagement, all those things can help with brain age. It's been shown that those kinds of things can increase brain volume. So you're not, I mean, people used to not do the ApoE4 because it was like, oh, I don't want to know, and it means I'm going to get Alzheimer's. It's very actionable, and it's something you want to know because you can make a difference. It's not like the Huntington's gene where, just tell me when I'm going to die. No, it's something that I can really change that trajectory of things. If you like contact sports and you got an ApoE4, you got to be very careful because you don't repair damage. Boxing is something you like to do. If you have an ApoE4, I wouldn't do it, or do it with really good headgear. So, so these are the kinds of the information you can get to know where you are in brain aging. And these are not, the ApoE4 is not the kind that's for early onset. It's for late onset Alzheimer's. It's the kind that hits, 25% of 80 to 90-year-olds. And you want to be able to prevent that. I mean, we want to have a long life.
Proactive.
Yeah,
Yes.
and yeah, exactly. Be very proactive.
Yes.
So it is interesting that when you start to look at, well, what do you do to prevent brain aging? What do you do to prevent cardiovascular aging? What do you do to help immune system aging? A lot of the things overlap because they're all things that are affecting the hallmarks of aging beneficially that then devolve to maintaining better cellular function in those organ systems. I mean, there are some particular things, but really, keeping the cardiovascular system healthy, not being overweight, exercising, keeping muscle healthy and vital, exercising, all of those things are all important. And then you get into the more esoteric things like measuring telomere length, which I do, and I've been doing it for 20 years in my office. That's important. And then also maintaining telomerase activity, which is the enzyme that helps put telomere length on. Those are all various other molecular things that you can do in conjunction with an experienced longevity physician to go the next step. Once you're doing all the basics, I have a stepped approach. It's diet, lifestyle, exercise, stress reduction, supplements, then hormone optimization, then pharmaceuticals, and then there's some other modalities you can throw in there at a little lower, like hyperbaric oxygen therapy. Then there's stem cell therapies. There's a number of different other things you can do, but you just go up those steps, and you go as high as you need to go to keep the organ system functioning the way you want it to function. And the risk-benefit equation changes as you go higher, but that just depends on looking at how bad the system's working and whether or not the stuff that's at the lower levels, less risky. If it's not working, then you got to go to the next level.
Absolutely. Someone mentioned about sleep. Yes, sleep is important too.
Well, sleep is it's one of the most important things for the brain rejuvenation at night that takes place. A poor night's sleep. I remember when I was doing my residency, it was pre-Bell Commission. Actually, the Bell Commission came through just when I was done my internship. They they did some studies where they show that 24 hours being awake is like having two alcoholic beverages. So you need your sleep at night. There's no question about that. And doing all the things that are important. Sleep hygiene is that's all important. Turning the screens off and trying to turn the brain down. Getting good light exposure in the morning. I haven't tried them yet, but I'm going to. The blue blocker glasses for nighttime. All those things are important. Sleep is incredibly important.
It's very important. Someone asked about supplements. What are the top supplements, anti-aging supplements you normally recommend? Again, this is very personalized, but what are the top ones?
Yeah. So, I mean, again, I encourage people to work with a longevity physician to know what your markers show. But the vast majority of people over the age of 40 are going to have shortening telomeres. And so looking at them, and then even if you can't afford to get those tests done, turning on telomerase is a good thing. So one of the top supplements I use is TA65. It has to be a little bit an expensive supplement, but it's a supplement that's derived from a traditional Chinese medicine and has really been shown in multiple studies to turn on telomerase, which then lengthens telomeres, which makes for fewer senescent cells, makes for your stem cells to be able to divide, to regenerate degenerating tissues, but also goes into the mitochondria to help mitochondrial function, to reduce mitochondrial DNA damage, reactive oxygen species, to help with changing gene expression. All of that is beneficial effects of telomerase activation. So I really recommend getting on a TA65 or a supplement like that. NAD, of course, everybody's talking about. We don't have as many long-term studies, endpoint studies, but I measure intracellular NAD levels in patients, in all my patients, and most everybody over 40 has got a lower level, and the older you get, the lower it is. Taking precursor supplements like nicotinamide riboside or nicotinamide mononucleotide, NR or NMN. Most of my patients are on that. It can be helpful with energy. It can be helpful with improving gene expression to a more youthful pattern. We don't have strong data for that yet, but the downside we think is quite low, and so I think that's an important one. I mean, maintaining vitamin D levels are very important. Other things that we look at. So those are sort of some of the top supplements. Of course, I do strongly believe that fish oil. I just did an Instagram post on fish oil. I think that the data is very strong for maintaining a good omega-3 fatty acid percentage in your blood. Across countries around the globe, the higher the level of omega-3 fatty acids found in the blood, the lower the incidence of cardiovascular disease, and probably many other diseases if they look for those. So I check those levels as well. But if you don't, just eat your salmon once or twice a week, or more frequently if you can. If you can't do that, one of those people that hates fish, take your fish oil capsules. Those are all very important. Methylation is incredibly important, as we mentioned. So I check all the B vitamin levels. I check homocysteine, because homocysteine is a major metabolite in your blood of protein metabolism that can wreak havoc in your cardiovascular system. It's associated with increased all-cause mortality. So I want to see that level come down, and you need high levels of B vitamins to get those down. And some people have genetic polymorphisms, like they have the MTHFR, the 677T polymorphism. So they need very high levels of methylated B12 and methylfolate, trimethylglycine, things like that. So a good supplement that covers those is important. Glutathione is very important for antioxidant systems. I recommend that to a lot of patients, either through taking NAC and acetylcysteine, 500, 600 milligrams, up to a gram a day, to increase, because it's a precursor to glutathione, or you can use this pretty nice spray called Glutaral that is available to spray on your legs or your arms or your waist. 4 sprays can raise your glutathione level. When I'm out enjoying wine, which I do probably a little more frequently than I should, working on that, I'll spray some of that on at night so that it doesn't do as much damage when it gets turned into the aldehyde that alcohol gets turned into. So those are sort of top level things that we look at that probably are going to be beneficial in most people that are looking to help themselves age better as they grow older.
Amazing. So one last question. What excites you the most for the future of longevity medicine next 5 years?
Yeah, well, look, I think the interaction between AI and biomedicine, and biology and the biology of aging is what, yeah, but aging is incredibly complex, and so you need incredible computing power to really understand it. Um, we talk about these things like called digital twins, where you can feed into a computer all sorts of information about all the things that are, the levels from molecular level, all the biomarkers I talked about, and then sort of do experiments, what we call in silico, sort of in the computer. What happens if we do these changes? I think that and Ray Kurzweil, the futurist, has predicted many things and has been right about a lot of things. He thinks the aging process question is going to be solved in the next 10 years, and if it is, that's incredibly exciting, because being able to function at, a 40-year-old level, even a 25-year-old level for 50, 60, 100 years, I think will be incredible for the human race. That's sort of big picture. In the shorter term, I think we're just getting better and better at looking at the differences between us, what what to give one person versus another person, how to measure the effectiveness of it. And I also think that we're seeing a democratization of it, where these are now, like I said, that $15,000 instrument to measure your arterial stiffness, that's now down to an instrument you can buy for your home. Same thing with the body composition. Telemedicine is bringing it to more and more people, so more and more people can be healthy. Some of these molecular tests hopefully will come down in price as well, as we start doing, whole experiments on a chip that can be done. So I think, the future is very bright. It's a little overwhelming in some ways, but I'm excited to have patients. And that's what I love about my job. I have, a lot of really talented people that are doing amazing things in many different industries: finance, the arts, science, etc. And, like myself, I'm 60, I'll be 66 in a few months. I'm like not even thinking about retiring, so I need to keep going, and they need to keep going. So I think that all of that is something that's going to be fantastic for the human race, really. This revolution that's going to make the internet revolution look like nothing much. It's really going to be pretty amazing.
Yeah, amazing. We need people like you, so you look after yourself and look after all of us.
Thank you very much.
It was amazing talking to you, and hopefully I'll meet you once again soon in one of the talks.
I'm looking forward to it. Absolutely. Thanks very much for
Thanks.
having me
Thanks
on.
everyone here, and see you soon, everyone.
All right. Take care.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Take care. Bye.